Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and Prime Minister's Questions was back on again this week after being missed out last week, although that hardly seems to have mattered because the government destroyed their credibility last week with other events more than any PMQs could have done. But in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the questions that were asked of Boris Johnson today, not only by Keir Starmer and Ian Blackford, but also a couple of other MPs as well, where I thought it was particularly interesting. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So it was before the leader of the opposition starts to ask his questions, then there's usually one or two MPs get to ask a few, and one was quite interesting because they were talking about something that Boris Johnson was making great play of, to do with our involvement in the international efforts to develop a vaccine for COVID. And Boris Johnson was boasting about this virtual conference to pursue a global race to find this vaccine. And, it sounded very good and very laudable it is too. And then I'm just thinking to myself, but you talk about virtual conferences, and we had a virtual parliament, which was, a fairly impressive feat, and it all worked. And yet you've now abolished that virtual parliament. But we'll wait for Starmer to get to that question. So, there was then another question, actually, I ought to get onto, into the fact that COVID disproportionately affects certain groups of people. And the government don't deny this. And the question was asked, why is the Prime Minister not publishing the report into the review on how COVID disproportionately affects some groups so that we can actually get the help out where it's needed? And all the Prime Minister did in answer to that, he didn't even answer this question, was to say, oh yeah, the government's commissioned a report and we're going to look at practical steps to take after that. And thinking, yeah, if I was that MP can't come back. But if I was that MP, I'd be thinking, yeah, I know, I've just told you that. I'm asking you why you haven't published it. And this is don't imagine it's any different for the questions coming to him from here. So, Keir Starmer's first question. First of all, he stood up and made a statement about the tragic murder of George Floyd in America. And he made his position quite clear on it, and he said he was surprised that the Prime Minister hasn't said anything, but he hopes that he will convey to President Trump the feeling in this country about our, frankly, abhorrence to it. Now, the Prime Minister, I'll come to his response in a minute. The real question, because that wasn't a question, that was just a little thing you throw in. His actual question was that Boris Johnson has just recently announced that he is going to take direct control of COVID. So then Starmer said, okay, so if you're going to take direct control of COVID now, who has been in direct control of it up to now? Few little titters from the benches there as well. I'm not sure they were all from the opposition benches either. So the Prime Minister, in terms of the George Floyd sentiment, because this is a cunning way of getting two questions in really, he said it was inexcusable. He certainly was not trying to, say, we'll have to just see what happens. He said it was inexcusable. We've all seen the footage. There's no bones about that. And he also reiterated that people do have a right to protest. But then he talked about, the right to legally protest as a way of getting Trump out of it. Naturally, he didn't answer the question about what he'd be saying to Donald Trump. Then, in terms of the real question, which was about, okay, so who was in charge of COVID before you, if you have only just taken full control of it, he would say, oh, of course I take full responsibility for what the government does. And then he just blathered on about, things that the government have allegedly done. He was saying, we're seeing fewer hospital admissions. And I'm thinking to myself, they did go down, but I think at the moment, aren't they going up? Isn't the trend upwards at the moment? I'm pretty sure that's the case. But the key thing here is he didn't answer the question. And then that's the point I'm going to have to make over and over again. He was asked a question and he didn't answer it. What he could have done, now let's say he didn't want to say Dominic Cummings or someone like that. What he could have done, he doesn't have to answer a question as such. He could refute the question. That's fine. That's totally fine. So what he could have done, he says, he clarified what he meant by taking direct control. In other words, what was the state of affairs before, where he was apparently still in control? What did he mean by the phrase? Because Keir Starmer is very, very consistent in his approach to these questions. He doesn't just ask a question out of thin air. He quotes people. In this particular case, he's quoting the Prime Minister. So what the Prime Minister could have done if he didn't feel that the question was fair is to have explained what he meant by his statement of taking direct control of the COVID situation. What did he mean by that? He could have said that, and he didn't say that either. So he didn't answer it and he didn't refute it. Second question. So Keir Starmer said that he wrote it, and this was news to everyone because it was in confidence. He said he wrote to the Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, in confidence, he said, because he said he didn't want to make a big deal out of it, big political deal out of it. And he asked the Prime Minister what help he could give in terms of supporting the government in terms of plans to reopen schools. And he said, as I say, he didn't make this letter publicly known because he didn't want to make it a political issue. But he said that the Prime Minister didn't reply to the letter. He said he should have at least had a reply to the letter. Then he went into his main questions, which is that the easing of the restrictions require difficult judgment calls. And at a point like this, he said the lockdown was very easy instructions, but now it's less so. And at a time like this, you absolutely need public trust to be at its highest in order to go along with it. And he quoted a YouGov pollster saying, and YouGov, by the way, in terms of, you'll see polls all over the place, and all of them are agreeing that the government's hemorrhaging credibility at the moment. But there are only two that can back up their polls with, ultimately, how do you tell whether a polling company is accurate or not? You can only base it on a real poll, i.e. an election. Do they get election results right? Only YouGov and Ipso Mori consistently do, very accurately as well. So those ones. So a YouGov pollster is absolutely someone you'd pay attention to. And this pollster, Keir Starmer, quoted him as saying he's never in his whole career seen such a drop in trust in government. And Keir Starmer said, can you explain this? Can you add your own thoughts to this, basically? So the Prime Minister, again, because Starmer's quite cunning, really, in getting two questions for the price of one, said, first of all, well, he rang up Keir Starmer about this letter. We've only got his word for it, of course, because Starmer didn't actually acknowledge this. But he said he rang him up, and Starmer at that point offered no dissent. Now, obviously, we don't know what took place in a telephone conversation. The importance of writing a letter in response is that there's then a record of it. So even if you were a Boris Johnson supporter, thought, if he rang him, that's perfectly reasonable. You should know it's never reasonable. There's nothing wrong with ringing up the leader of the opposition in this circumstance, but you would then follow it up with a letter. That's standard practice, because these things need to be a matter of record. Anyone can say anyone said something. You write it in a letter. That's just standard procedure, and the reason it's standard procedure is so it's then a matter of record. In this particular case, wouldn't have had to have been a matter of public record if it wasn't being made public. But if it had to be, then it could be at some later date, as it's now going to be. But in terms of the question about, this drop in trust in the government, again, did he answer the question? No. Did he refute it? No, he did not. He just went on saying, the majority of the population understand the difficult position we're in. He blathered on about washing hands again. And then he says, I think everyone understands that. To which I was thinking, everyone understands that, do they? That's why they're all packing out the beaches and drinking heavily in the sun. That's why that is it? And that's why whenever I go to the shops, I went to the supermarket yesterday. I usually go on a Thursday, went on a Tuesday yesterday, because someone's birthday tomorrow. It's not one coming round, don't worry. And I saw one other person wearing a mask in there. It wasn't super busy, but there are people in there. There was me wearing a mask, and there's some other person wearing a mask. No members of staff wearing masks, and no other customers wearing masks. There you go. The idea that everyone understands this, no, they clearly don't. They absolutely clearly do not. But again, didn't answer the question about what he's going to do about the loss of trust that the government have suffered as a result of last week's shenanigans, or even to refute it. He didn't even try and say, well, I don't think that's true. Didn't even say that. Then the third question. So, Keir Starmer, in response to the fact that Boris Johnson wouldn't, send a response to this letter, Keir Starmer said, I've got no option now but to place this letter in the public domain. So I haven't read it yet. That'll be out. So then Keir Starmer came on to the expected question. This is the one you knew you were going to get, because basically the last Prime Minister's questions 2 weeks ago, Boris Johnson promised this test, track and trace, even though track and trace are the same thing. It should really be test, track and isolate, or test, trace and isolate if you prefer. But he was he was quoting Boris Johnson himself. And he mentioned that this would be a world-beating system. And yes, it would be fully in place for June the 1st. And Starmer said, it isn't. And he quoted various officials saying that we're weeks away from getting this in place. And he also said that the Prime Minister's own chair of this group for implementing it said that this will not be ready until the end of June. And he noted that the Prime Minister must have been briefed about this. He must have been briefed about it. So why did he make this promise, given that he must have been briefed that it wasn't going to be ready for June the 1st? So then the Prime Minister started a little trick he'd been using in the previous Prime Minister's questions as well, about saying, oh, Keir Starmer, he's attacking, these people that are trying to put these systems in place, and he's attacking our public health workers and things like that. Saying he was casting aspersions on people who were trying to develop the system. No, he wasn't. He was casting aspersions on you. He wasn't even saying, why is this system not in place now? Because it should be. That's a perfectly reasonable question. That wasn't the question. The question was simply this: why did Boris Johnson say it'd be in place on June the 1st if it wasn't going to be? And he knew at the time it wasn't going to be. But again, it's just the bluff and bluster. The blather. And he also said, the system was up and running on June the 1st. It was up and running. As a result, thousands of people are following the law, in terms of being contacted about isolating. And it's like, well, no, it's not up and running. And that's not just a case of looking around and going, well, it's clearly, it's not up and running. It actually is not up and running. But that I can just observe that and say that's the case. Again, Keir Starmer was quoting Boris Johnson's own appointment for running this system, who himself has said that it is not going to be in place until the end of June. So again, that was just a blatant lie. But again, what is it? It's not answering the question. It's an attempt to refute it, but it's an attempt to refute it that no one can believe, because at the end of the day, Starmer has quoted Boris Johnson's own person in charge of this system, who said it's not going to be in place. So then on to the fourth question for Starmer, and he said, well, he welcomes the news that, this thing's is going to be in place. But he notes that the Prime Minister didn't put a number on the number traced, because he said that people were being traced now, which is baffling to say, it's not an easy thing to do without the app working and all the rest of it. But he says the key thing is here, if you're going to say this tracing program's fully in effect, we need to know that that people are being contacted as needs to be. And he noted, well, if we're getting about 7,000 to 9,000 new infections each day, and that's what the government are saying, that's the government's own, figures. Between 7,000 and 9,000 new cases, new infections each day estimated. So he says, when you sort of add this all up, we basically need about 45,000 people a day being contacted that will have come into contact with one of these newly infected people. And he says, well, does it? Because you haven't said how many are being contacted. Is it 45,000? Is it? And he said, and he did note, to preempt what Boris Johnson might have said, he said, and the problem with the Prime Minister using these statistics is that our own statistics watchdog keeps rapping ministers for misusing them. In other words, our own watchdog, our own government watchdog on use of statistics, keeps saying that the government are lying when they're using statistics. They're deliberately using them in a misleading way. And again, he asked the Prime Minister, can you not see how this is damaging trust in government? To which, again, the Prime Minister came back to his usual tactic of first of all, not answering, but say, oh, you're attacking public bodies again. You're attacking public bodies. No, he's not. No, he's not. But again, didn't answer the question or even refute it. Did not refute it. And he said, in terms of the testing, which wasn't even asked about, you said, oh, we got up to 100,000 by the end of May, he said, it's supposed to be the end of April. But that may have been a misspoke. I mean, we haven't got to 100,000 a day at all, ever. And he said we got up to 200,000 at the start of this month. So apparently we're testing 200,000 people every day. That's what the Prime Minister's saying. The only problem is we have to take their word for it, because the government are not releasing any figures. They were releasing the number of people tested. Then they started fiddling those figures. Then people became informed about how they were fiddling them. Then they just stopped reporting them altogether, because even their fiddled figures were still not going above 100,000. So 2 weeks ago, the government I think it might have been 10 days ago. It was about 2 weeks ago, though, give or take a few days. It was certainly getting on for 2 weeks. Stopped reporting on the number of people being tested a day. Now, at the time, it was well short of 100,000. How are we supposed to believe it's actually got up to 200,000? Because actually, that would be something to crow about. I mean, it's still not enough, but from where they were, yeah, fair play, fair play. Why aren't you reporting the numbers then if they're looking so good? A government that stops reporting numbers and then tries to say that actually the numbers are really good. Can we see them? No, but they're amazing. Do we buy that? We don't buy that. And in fact, a bit later on, Jeremy Hunt, actually, I'll put this in now, Jeremy Hunt, who's a Conservative MP, was his main leadership rival, but is now chair of the Health Select Committee, more importantly, asked about this. And he said, and he asked about like the turnaround on getting results back. To which the only response he really got was the Prime Minister saying that 90% of tests are turned around within 48 hours, and it's going to be within 24 hours by the end of this month. Again, pay no attention. I will pay no attention anyway. You can do what you like, but I'll pay no attention to promises of what's going to happen at the end of this month, because they keep making promises about what's going to happen at the end of some month that's never met. Anyway, on to Starmer's question. So on to his fifth question, his penultimate question, and he said, well, it's all right you saying, I supported you and then all of a sudden I'm not supporting you. He says, your actions over the last couple of weeks make it very difficult to support this government. He then noted the Prime Minister saying on the 10th of May that if our alert level will not allow us to ease restrictions, then we will just wait. We'll just wait on it. And he noted that at the time the Prime Minister said that, we were at alert level 4, and the R value was noted as being somewhere between 0.5 and 0.9. So he asked the Prime Minister, so what is the alert level now and what is the R level now? Now, again, just tried his attacks. He says, the Leader of Opposition knows perfectly well that the alert level does allow for this. The 5 tests do allow for this. No, they don't. They really don't. And he confirmed that the alert level is at 4. Because he had to. Ministers tried to say we've gone down to 3. We haven't. And actually, for the level to which we've eased restrictions now, we'd need to be at alert level 1 in terms of what the Prime Minister said on that 10th of May. And we're not. They're trying to claim we're at 3, but the Prime Minister in the House, where he has lied, but he didn't want to lie on this particular case, had to confirm we're at alert level 4 because his own scientific advisors have said so. And he didn't answer the question at all about what the R value is because, again, the government's own figures put it at between 0.7 and 0.9. So, in actual fact, the R value has not fallen compared with what we knew it to be on the 10th of May. And the alert level has not dropped down either, was the point being made. To which, again, the Prime Minister was not able to answer the question and was not able to refute it either, other than trying to say that the tests have been met and the alert level allows it. Well, if the alert level didn't allow it back on the 10th of May, why does it suddenly allow it now when it's the same alert level? So then on to the final question. Starmer said that, because again, Prime Minister was going, he came up with a phrase. What was the phrase? He said, the Starmer's position is to support U-turn and then criticise. As if, you go along with our things and then you're criticising us. It's not fair. And as Starmer was trying to point out, we went along with your initial lockdown. We were in favour of that. Doesn't mean to say we have to be in favour of your madness now, does it? And he also, again, made the point that he actually offered to help the government and that offer was not taken up. But he says the measures now are not explained, and he can't support that. He cannot support the measures the government are taking now, and he never has supported the measures the government have taken in this last week or two. Then he came on to his last one, because he knew what answer he would get for this. There was no need. He might as well have put this question last because, the voting debacle from yesterday. I've already done a video on it earlier today, where they've scrapped the virtual parliament that was working well, and they're forcing MPs to come in. And Keir Starmer said, and he will know about this, this is where his experience as a QC absolutely comes in. He says, if any other employer behaved like this, it would be a clear and obvious case of indirect discrimination under the Equalities Act. To which the PM again banged on about ordinary people queue for shopping, as if that somehow makes it all right to queue for voting when we have another system. Because here's the thing, it wouldn't be all right to queue for shopping if it were possible for everyone to get, a delivery. shopping delivery, because then everyone would do that. But we can't. You know, supermarkets themselves say they've massively increased their capacity. They've really picked up the ball on this. But there's only about 10% of people at most can get their shopping, you know, by delivery. So you've got to go to the stores. That means you've got to queue. MPs don't have to queue. We had a system in place. He apologised for the inconvenience. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. You're not sorry enough to stop it then. Now, they did actually add something in, because the problem was there are some MPs who are not physically allowed to go to Parliament. The ones who are clearly not. I mean, look, this is from, you know, the Commons today. The MPs are not shielding. In fact, Jacob Rees-Mogg later on said, I didn't put this in the video, but he later on said, you know, when it was put to him, what if an MP contracts it? All MPs are going to have to isolate. He says, no, they won't, because we're distancing. Well, two things to that. One, that they're not distancing. Just because you've got a queuing system in place, they're going past each other all the time. Look here, you've got MPs in each other's faces. They're not distancing at all. And I watched just before Prime Minister's questions, MPs coming in and out of the chamber. They were bumping into each other, for goodness sake. It's like dodgems. And then the second thing, of course, it makes no difference whether you consider yourself distancing or not. The regulations do not allow for that. If you're told to isolate, you know, if you've come into contact with someone, you're supposed to isolate. That's what it says. I mean, what's supposed to, if someone, let's say someone tries to ring me and tells me I've been in contact with someone, which won't happen if I'm indoors, but let's say, and they told me I had to isolate. So Jacob Rees-Mogg says I can just say to them, no, I think you'll find I was distancing. What? And anyway, but there has been a bit of a thing that MPs who can't physically get there because they're shielding will be able to vote by proxy. But again, it doesn't stop the fact that you're getting hundreds and hundreds of MPs into a small space. Anyway. And also, they couldn't vote yesterday. Then he banged on about schools. You know, I don't even know what that was about. But, you know, nonetheless, it was another example of not answering the question, not refuting the question. Then Ian Blackford, the SNP, came up with a couple. He decided to go on about making the UK's position clear on the George Floyd thing, and in terms of representations to the president. And, you know, he criticised Donald Trump and said that the UK doesn't seem to have offered up any official government response. And he asked what representations the Prime Minister has made to the President of the United States. And he also said, can the Prime Minister just say it, please, that Black Lives Matter? To which the Prime Minister did say that. And he also said, you know, people have the right to protest as long as it's lawful. And he noted, because he didn't want any protests in this country, he did note that in this country that would include social distancing. So in other words, you can't protest. But you can fill in petitions, things like that. It would be stupid to do a protest like in America anyway. Don't do that. But he didn't answer the question. You know, the question was, what representations have you made to Donald Trump? That was all. That's all. He didn't say that. So then Ian Blackford gets a second question, only two questions. And his second question was to note that the Prime Minister hasn't actually answered the question. I asked you, what representations have you made to the President? You didn't answer that. And then for his second question, he said, you know, he notes that the UK exports riot control equipment, weapons even, to the United States, including tear gas and rubber bullets. And he said, given how these things have been used on peaceful protesters, which they have, it has to remember, some protests in America have been violent. But it has to be remembered that the first riot was sparked from a peaceful protest facing tear gas. The police launched tear gas into a peaceful protest. So tear gas that may well have been exported from the UK has been used on peacefully protesting American citizens. A protest which is guaranteed by the Constitution in America. And rubber bullets. Now, I saw some footage of people stood on their balcony on their own homes being fired at from an armoured police vehicle or National Guard vehicle, I believe it was. You know, they were just standing on their own property and they had rubber bullets fired at them. So basically, Ian Blackford said, you know, is the Prime Minister going to urgently review our exports? To which I note that the Prime Minister still didn't answer the question about what representations to President Trump, given another opportunity to do so, and also a non-committal look at this. He said he will look at any complaints. not saying specifically about this one. But of course, Ian Blackford presumably will follow up with an official complaint, to which the government will have to make a review and then conclude that there's nothing happened. They won't do anything, of course. So that was it. I mean, that's another 8 questions from the 2 leaders of the largest opposition parties, and 0 of those questions answered or refuted. The closest thing to an answer was in implying that he would look at our exports of, riot equipment to the US, because he'll have to. And it seems to me that Boris Johnson's strategy is absolutely going to be to come up with prepared responses. So it doesn't matter what the question is. He's just going to come up with... Because again, he was blathering on about schools and queuing and all sorts when that had nothing to do with the question today. And that's obviously going to be the thing that he decides is going to get him through it. Now, ordinarily, on something that's purely political like Brexit, you may get away with that. But I doubt that this is going to help him through this, because as much as he keeps trying to say that the government is doing well, it's increasingly evident that they are not. And when I say increasingly evident, it's always been evident, but evident to an increasing proportion of the population, we might say. And sorry about the dogs barking. I'm going to carry on. And he says, and the thing is, for me, very quickly at the end, for every person who now dies, and remember we've still got hundreds dying every single day from this virus, for every single person that dies, that's another group of relatives and another group of friends seeing the government's response for what it is. This number is going up. And when the second wave becomes undeniable, remember what a second wave is. There's a human cost to this. And again, far, far more friends and relatives, having the scales fall from their eyes to this. Johnson is just going to seem less and less credible when he gives these responses, when he tries to bluff people that, oh yes, this is going on, we're doing this and we're doing this. When he talks about the number of tests going out, every single person who goes for a test and can't get one because they've run out or something, because that still happens, they know it's not true. Every time this happens, and it's going to happen to more and more people. But for now, I don't think this will be panic stations for the Conservatives after today. They lost a lot of credibility over the last week or two. Johnson didn't do anything to regain it today. I really don't think the papers will be able to talk up this performance, but I don't think they'll be able to, I don't think the right-wing papers will savage it either. I don't think, of the people still supporting him, I don't think he would have lost much after today from that. But, you can absolutely see the way Keir Starmer's going about this. In every single question, he's quoting people. He's quoting people, usually, and where possible, he's quoting the government or the government's own appointments. And so just over time, it's going to become more and more clear that Boris Johnson is not able to answer these questions. And I think this is now a drip strategy that Keir Starmer's going with. We'll see how it plays out over the coming weeks. But that's my reading of PMQs for today. Hope you found it interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. Until next time, I'll see you later.